To our weekly, bi-weekly ID What's This Bird live roundup. My name is Nate Swick. I'm excited to be here, and as you can see, Greg is not here with me today. It's not Greg. Greg had he made some plans this afternoon that unfortunately precluded him joining us. He had to go get a flu shot and vote, which strike me as two very important things that he should probably be doing instead of talking about birds online. But I'm excited to have you all here on all the various social media feeds. And as you can see, I am joined today by my colleague Ted Floyd, Birding Magazine editor. He's standing in for Greg. Ted, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. And Nate, as you know, I love extemporaneous speaking with no preparation
No
whatsoever.
preparation.
I do feel compelled to say that you sprung this on me about 15 minutes
Yeah,
ago.
that is true.
So I'm learning the ropes here about just how we're going to proceed, but it looks fun, and I'm looking forward to talking birds with you and everybody
Fantastic.
else.
Yeah, sorry about that, and thank you for being flexible with your time. I know that we did kind of spring this on you last minute, but we're excited to have
So
you
what
here
I had to
talking about birds.
cancel, believe it or not, was an appointment with an insurance adjuster.
I'm
So this
sorry
is
that you
a
had to do that.
very felicitous. No. I'm very delighted that this has happened. This is a much better
Yeah.
way to spend my Friday afternoon than with an insurance adjuster.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. How is birding on the Front Range of? You're coming at us from Boulder, Colorado, in the Front Range. How is birding in the Front Range these days? How's fall coming along?
It's exceedingly complicated. You've probably heard it, or many of you all have heard that we're in the midst of a horrific fire episode right now. Currently, it's in the 20s Fahrenheit and snowing lightly. It's supposed to be back in the 60s tomorrow, and then the real snow comes on. Yesterday afternoon, I had a beautiful flight of sandhill cranes going right over the downtown section here. So things are still on the move, but we're kind of getting into the very, very end of migration, and it's going to be a full-on winter. It sounds like at the beginning of the week.
It's very exciting. Here in the southeast, we are moving on. It's kind of the peak of sparrow migration right now. A lot of people on the listserv, Facebook groups, local Facebook groups that I'm a member of, have been reporting, the typical mid-October flight of sparrows here in the east. Things like white-throated sparrows finally arriving, and of course the very, very first juncos and yellow-rumped warblers, which are not obviously not sparrows, but sort of come with the same waves. So fall is coming on. The ducks will be here soon, and it will be full on winter, or as a winter as it gets here in the southeast.
As it gets in,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so as usual, what we have in this program is that I've collected a number of interesting identification problems, interesting seasonal identification questions that people might be seeing across the continent with birds. I pulled them from the What's This Bird group, the What's This Bird Facebook group, and we are broadcasting live from that What's This Bird Facebook group, also onto Twitter and YouTube. So if you have any questions about birds, bird identification, any of that stuff for Ted or I, please send those questions in the comments, and we will handle them as they go. Jackie Laughlin, who you may or may not know, Ted, says hi, Nate and Ted on YouTube. Hello, Jackie.
Right.
So that
Hello.
you prove that this is live. We are doing this live. High wire
Excellent.
bird identification. So Ted, I'm going to throw this over to we're going to go straight into it. Let's go into the PowerPoint presentation. Our first bird here was one that was posted very recently, and it is a goose. I think we can go that far. I'm not going to, hint anything. But Ted, there are a couple whitish geese that you can find across much of the continent this time of year. Some more common than others. So what are you looking for when you are looking at a bird like this and trying to determine which one you're seeing?
Sure. Well, the first thing I look at, and I'm going to beat this dead horse several times, I'm sure during the afternoon, is date and location. So it's what
Yeah.
I actually read that as South Korea initially. It says
Yeah,
South
I did
Kansas.
too, actually.
The type is very small on my end here. So if we were in South Korea, that would actually change things quite a bit. But we
It'd
were
be
in
a very
South
good bird.
Kansas.
Both of these birds
So
would be good.
by the way, I have that species on my South Korea list, believe it or not,
Is
if
that
it is
right?
what I think that it is. Yeah. But yeah, we're in South Kansas, so I'm going to guess Wichita or somewhere
Yeah,
like
South
that. There are
Central.
three birds in this image. Two of them are quite large Canada geese, even though I can't see the tops of their heads. So yeah, this is one of the white geese. This is a fairly dusky white goose. So I'm thinking we're in that snow Ross's category. in there. And again, I'm looking at the screen fairly small here, but given the overall sort of heft and also sort of lankiness of that bird, the long neck, the long bill, I don't see any reason to call this a Ross's goose. I think it's going to be a hatch year or first year snow goose. So my it's definitely a Ross's or a snow goose. I guess it could be a hybrid, but I don't really want to go there. It's only October.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, we don't do that until things get really dull in February. But I would call this a hatch year or first cycle um, snow goose.
Yeah, as would I, and I think that was the consensus on What's This Bird as well. The things that I'm sort of looking for is that sort of all over dusky color of Ross's goose when I see them, and it's actually sort of an unusual, though annual bird in the southeast part of the United States. I'm sure that they're a bit more common where you are in Colorado. They tend to be a lot whiter, a lot more ivory, bright white. And of course, with the very cute rounded head and the dinky little bill with almost the straight line between the face and the bill. And I know that, people want to start talking about hybrids. It seems like every Ross's goose that comes here in the southeast gets the hybrid treatment just because Ross's goose is kind of an unusual bird. But I don't know. I think hybrids are more uncommon than pure Ross's goose for the most part. Why I think zebras when horses will do, as they say. So, definitely a snow goose. But when I'm looking for a Ross's goose, I'm looking for that kind of short neck, cute rounded head, tiny little bill, and then the straight line. They do tend to stand out.
One other thing I'll just say about Ross's goose is if it were a full-on adult, which it is not, that bird has a really colorful bill too. Up close, the base of the bill has those kind of greenish and bluish warts, and then the bill is of course mainly pinkish, but also sometimes with blue highlights. I know it's an all-white bird with a little bit of black in the wings, but if you just look at the bill of an adult Ross's goose, I mean, this is hyperbole, but it's kind of got like the king eider thing going. It's a really colorful. Yeah, I mean, I'm a very muted king eider, but the bill of an adult Ross's goose is a very beautiful thing.
Yeah, and so what is your thought on the hybrid thing? Do people think people jump to hybrids? I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, here we're getting into the rather thorny issue of like what is a species, right? So,
sure.
They're quite close. The hybrids probably seem to breed because there are hybrid, quote unquote, hybrid birds that have varying degrees of snow versus Ross's goose traits of them. But I'm generally more lenient when it comes, and I'm more inclined to call those sort of Rossi gooses pure Rosses rather than hybrids, but that's just me.
I am inclined to agree with everything you said, as long as we're restricting the conversation to Rosses and snow geese. Now, those two other big boys or girls on the left and the right, we struggle with Canada cackling goose hybrid issues all the time in Colorado. In fact, there's a sort of recent developing evidence that a huge swath of the contact zone between those birds on the west side of the Hudson's Bay is just a huge hybrid swarm. And, to many of us in the United States, that just sounds like some place up north, but that's a stretch of, more than 1,000 miles and a couple of 100 miles wide where they're integrating. So my guess is there are an awful lot of hybrid Canada cackling geese out there. Like you, I tend to see these white geese as either Rosses or snow.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen one that I've been like, oh yeah, that's definitely a hybrid, because the question is always sort of more.
It's difficult, especially when you start to deal with the old lesser snow geese and large Ross's geese. It gets messy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of hybrids and jumping to the hybrid gun, I want to throw this up there because I had this conversation with Matt Smith. Matt, if you're watching, I'm going to eat my words here, and I'm going to do so publicly. So this is another bird that popped up on the What's This Bird that I thought was really interesting. It's a night heron, of course, but this photo right here really, like, I tend to go by Gis or Jizz, as people call it, a lot, especially when I'm kind of scrolling through these photos on What's This Bird. And I would say that probably about 85 to 90% of the time it serves me pretty well. But I'll tell you that it totally got me wrong on this bird, because when I looked at it, I looked at obviously a young night heron, which can be kind of a thorny species. But I am looking at the front of the neck, and I'm seeing kind of big, buffy, light-colored stripes. And I'm looking at the bill, and it looks awfully long and kind of down curved and kind of sharp at the tip. And I thought that this one was likely a black-crowned night heron. That was my impulse, but there are some things that sort of cause you to question that. Ted, what do you think about this bird?
So I'm coming in at this from a slightly different angle than you are because I'm only dimly aware of the conversation that you're
Right.
talking about.
Yeah,
So
just
I think it
that.
was Allen Ginsberg said, first thought, best thought. And just my first thought without even beginning to ponder the width of the white blobs or anything was in fact yellow-crowned night heron on this one. And I can't really justify that. It's just got that yellow crown kind of blocky head and
Hmm.
fine streaky look about it. One thing that's sort of a strange advantage for me coming from Colorado, where we have no yellow-crowned night herons, is that I see lots and lots and lots of black-crowned night herons,
Oh,
and
there you
this
go.
doesn't really look like a Colorado night heron, which means it's something I ought to be probably paying attention to.
All
So,
right.
yeah, I know that's kind of a weird sort of like non-perspective or anti-perspective on the bird, but this doesn't look like a Colorado. And just back up here. So black-crowned night herons are widespread, common breeders in Colorado. We see them
Hmm.
all the time. Yellow-crowned night heron is casual, I guess, in the state. I've actually never seen one in the state. And this doesn't look like a night heron, from a Colorado perspective to me. Taking a closer look at the bird here again, that overall shape of the bird, it's sort of, it's blocky, and I can sort of
Hmm.
imagine it being long necked and long legged. I'm sort of imagining that as I go along here. I do like the sort of fine, streaky appearance overall for that bird. So anyhow, if I saw this, it looks like it's it's at Brigantine in New
Hmm.
Jersey. If I saw this anywhere in Colorado, I would certainly start taking photos and then call a birder and have him or her come look at it pretty quickly.
Yeah, and so I see probably about equal amounts of both night herons
Yeah.
in South Carolina or North Carolina rather, and where I live in the Piedmont, we have more yellow crowns than black crowns. They breed in the neighborhoods, the
Yeah.
well-established neighborhoods. They're weird that way, and when I see them, maybe it's just because it's fluffed up from the cold or whatever.
Mm.
Like they tend to look more lanky to me, and I just didn't get that feeling. Of course, then I'm gonna go to the next photo. This other photo came out,
Okay.
and that's like, oof. Well, obviously, look, it's got that long, lanky look. It's got the kind of long neck, the tiny markings on the neck. The streaks are much, it gives you the impression that, it looks like a yellow crowned night heron in this photo, and that, of course, is what it is. But it goes to show that identifying birds from a single photo can be kind of, especially if you're doing it quickly, can be kind of
Yep.
troublesome. And then when you plant your flag, you're less inclined to back down
Sure.
from it, which was where I was.
Yeah.
So, Matt, you got me.
Hey,
You're right.
yeah. Nate, just on a technical note, I actually don't see that second image you're talking about, but
Right.
that's probably
Okay.
okay because I think we're about to move on to a warbler
Yeah.
anyhow.
Hold on.
So,
I'm gonna send it to you. Actually, I'm not.
and actually, let me say one other thing while you're
Forget it.
sending it to me. We talked about hybrids, and I just wanted
Yeah.
to mention that although these birds both have the name night heron in their name, in fact, they both have the name crowned in their name. I'm not aware that they ever hybridized. They're actually in different
There are a couple
genera.
records of
Oh no,
hybrids.
oh no,
Yeah.
oh well, how about that? But
Yeah.
am I right that they're considered to be in different genera? They're not even
They are in different genera. That's correct. Yeah,
Nycticorax
they're
and
not that
Nyctis.
close.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
herons and egrets are weird. Like I've seen hybrids from other differing genera in
Oh, really?
herons as well. Like
Oh, cool.
Agreta and Ardea will hybridize sometimes.
Mm.
Like it's, I don't know. Maybe they're closer than we think. As with all
Mm.
taxonomy, it's like where you draw
Sure.
the line that determines, and that line
But I
can be
will
drawn
say
sort of
I will say
arbitrarily.
that yeah, when I look at geese, my mind does go to hybrids. When I
Hmm.
look at night herons, my mind doesn't
Does
go to
not go to
hybrids.
hybrids.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I did find a cool photo of a bird that was photographed in Southern California that was evidently, as the California Bird Records Committee determined, it was likely a hybrid, and it did have some similar features. Well, I mean, obviously, because if this is a yellow crown, it's going to have similar features to yellow crown. It's going to have similar features to both of them, but it did have a kind of a shorter bill, and the bill did look more. It looked like a yellow crown bill with a black crown colors. It was a very strange bird. But I will let this one go. This one is yellow crown night heron. And let's go to this warbler, also
Right.
from Kansas, and it might have been from the same person. Ted. So we get a number of photos here, 6 of them, which is very nice of the observer to post all of them. And
Yeah, well,
yeah,
it's funny
what are you
because
seeing here?
we talk about the danger of one photo, and If you only give me one of these, I think I actually might have been more certain about what I'm going to say than if you'd given me all six of them. On my panel here, for example, if we look at, like, let's say it's what's at the second row, the first column, the bird facing away from us.
Hmm.
You know, I'm struck by the bright yellow undertail cover. It's apparently the very long tail, the
Yeah.
short wing, the gray color overall. It's in a juniper, by the way. I mean, all of that just screams orange-crowned warbler to me. The bird next to it, so the second column, the second row, not only looks like an orange-crowned warbler, but I think I can get it to subspecies. It looks, and this would be unusual for Kansas, it looks like
Yeah.
the Orestera
Yeah. The
subspecies.
Western ones. Yeah.
Well, like I call it the interior west, or the
Interior
far
ones.
western is, I think, Lutessans,
Hmm.
and then the Rocky Mountain breeder is called Orestera, and I think that's what this is. It's got those eye arcs going there. It's just a fairly colorful bird overall. One of these images, yeah, the sixth one, which would be again second row, third column, looks very gray hooded to me.
Hmm.
So I'm calling it an orange-crowned warbler, and I'm struck by the possibility that this would be Orestera, the interior west breeder, which is not well documented as far as I understand from Kansas. I have this kind of knowledge of Orestera because I thought I saw one. In fact, I thought I photographically documented one at the Kansas Ornithological Society meeting at exactly this time last
Oh,
year.
there you go.
And well, yeah, and John Dunn chimed in that you just need to be careful. I agree with him. Be careful about birds out of range, and that um, Salada, the more expected orange-crowned warbler in Kansas, should not be discounted. So
Hmm.
it's an orange-crowned warbler.
Yeah.
It looks interior west to me, but I'm wary of that, and the possibility of just a bright and contrasty Salada, I think, can't really be ruled out.
Yeah, I'm definitely struck by like you, by the amount of yellow on this bird. When I think of orange-crowned warblers living in the southeast, as I do, they tend to be like very olive green all
Yeah.
over. Not a lot of color on any part of the bird, and there's a lot going on in this bird that. I mean, the lack of wing bars, the small, fine bill, the yellow underparts, those are all good for orange-crowned warbler. But, the face pattern is a little more
Mm-hmm.
is stronger than the ones that I tend to see in the southeast. And, obviously there's just so much yellow. When I birded in the west, I have frequently been struck by how bright the orange-crowned warblers are out there,
Yeah.
and how we do not get that, and how unfortunate that is,
Yeah.
because they're a very colorful
Um,
bird when you
so
see the
yeah, and I
western
want
ones.
to address that, especially on that first image. So what's again, first row, first
The one
column.
with Kansas
I,
in it.
the one that says Kansas, I could
Yeah.
see somebody, myself included, wondering why that's not a McGillivray's warbler. It's
Mm.
gray-headed, it's yellow below, it's got those nice eye arcs of McGillivray's. It's got a McGillivray's look to it, and I actually think that Orestera orange-crowned warbler versus McGillivray's is sort of again, I'm talking like immature female McGillivray's, is a underappreciated ID conundrum. But there are some things here that suggest it's not McGillivray's, especially in that second image there. That's got a honking
The
yellow
blurry one.
throat,
Yeah. Yeah,
which
it's a
is
lot.
not,
Yeah.
not something I would expect on a McGillivray's that
Mhm.
drab. The other thing is, and you see this so nicely in that, it's photo number 4, so second row, first column. Really long tail and short
Yeah.
wings, and
Yeah.
McGillivray's would be a relatively longer winged and shorter tailed warbler. So that again, it's not a McGillivray's warbler, but I think that an immature female McGillivray's and a bright Orestera orange crowned are plumage wise a lot more similar than I think a lot of us realize.
Yeah. And I'll use this opportunity to say, if anyone listening or watching has any questions about bird ID or just birding in general, I know Ted has opinions about that. Please feel free to leave those questions in the comments, wherever you can find them. I will try to
We can talk about anything you want to.
literally anything,
Please.
anything related to bird. Anything related to birds, because Ted's other interests go well beyond my my ability to speak on. But if anyone has any questions, please leave those in the comments. We'll be happy to take a crack at them, and we'll come back to that at the end of the slideshow that I've created here. So we're on a roll. Let's move on to this next one. This one was taken in my backyard of Burlington, North Carolina, and this being a Finch year, according to Tyler Hoare, the new head of the Winter Finch Report. This is a big finch flight year. I'm sure that a lot of people have been reporting and seeing pine siskins all over the lower 48. We certainly have been seeing a lot of them in the What's the Spurred group. But along with pine siskins comes this other boreal finch, which at least in the southeast part of the continent is one we don't see. It's probably like an every other year sort of bird, and so it tends to confuse a lot of people. So what we're looking at here is sort of a female brown finch that's either so because it's Burlington, North Carolina, we can rule out Cassin's finch, which is something that perhaps Ted would have to take into account. But here where we are, we have house finch and we have purple finch, and this is a very sort of classic purple finch, and it shows a lot of the features that I like to point to people when they're having trouble in non-purple finch years differentiating house finch from purple finch. So what you can see is the nice kind of clean brown and white on the flanks. So on a house finch, it would be much more smudgy all the way down. And of course, that pattern on the heads is a lot more white. That eyebrow, and of course the malar stripe, which is sort of the mustache stripe. That also says female purple finch. And the bill shows really well here. I always describe purple finch as having like a pointy bill, especially compared to house finch. And that is because that culmen, which is the line on the top of the upper mandible, is straight. It's like a straight line that goes from the forehead all the way down to the tip, where in a house finch it's a bit more curved, and it gives the impression that its bill is kind of shorter and flattened and maybe not as sharp. So if you see something that has like a really sharp bill, that's a purple finch, and they're showing up at people's feeders all over the southeast. Do you have any other purple finch tips, Ted?
Well, I certainly don't disagree with anything you just said, but I also just can't resist noting that you went quickly to finches, and I think
okay.
it would be
Let's go. Let's
no.
separate them from sparrows.
I was just going to say to separate this from sparrows, and
Yeah.
I don't think that's straightforward at all. If you were to ask me, what's the typical sparrow, I would say, well, it's a small, streaky brown bird with a conical bill and typically with some stripes on the face. That matches a sparrow absolutely perfectly for me. Now, in real life, we might notice the way that this bird is flying, the way that it's calling, perhaps the fact that it's, feeding at a thistle feeder or something like that. But we don't have any of those benefits here. There is one thing in the photo, and let me actually make the image big here, that, excuse me, I think that rules out every American sparrow, although not all warblers. And that's the strong sort of yellow-green fringing on the flight feathers there. So it almost gave me like sort of a Cape May warbler look there. But the flight feathers of the wing and the tail, even in these so-called female type plumages of purple finch, Cassin's finch, and also western purple finch, are going to have that greenish or yellowish fringing to them. And I don't think any American sparrow shows that. I mean, towhees, but there's things that really differentiate them. They've got the green-tailed towhee from this bird. The other bird I want to point out here that certainly is a ID contender just from a single photo would be a immature female rose-breasted grosbeak. Again, the plumage is really similar. It's a honking big bill, and it's got that very prominent pattern of brown, white, brown on the face. A grosbeak is going to be a much tubbier, chunkier bird overall, and the streaking is going to be less diffuse and uniform across the underparts the way it is here. But once we're in the realm of finches in North Carolina, it's like, this has to be a purple finch.
Really, well, there's a couple options. And pine siskins are certainly out and about and could theoretically cause some confusion with the species. Pine siskins tend to be much smaller and with a much more thin bill, very small. So
I totally a purple finch, and I guess since we're in North Carolina, we don't have to, as you say, worry about Cassins or.
How would you tell a Cassin's just off the? Because I don't know Cassin's finch very well at all.
Right. So a Cassin's finch in this plumage would be a very sort of finely streaked, crispy bird with a sort of a wispy, fine crown, and the facial markings wouldn't be nearly as prominent. Just a much more diffuse look to it overall. So when we rarely see purple finches in Colorado, usually in the very far eastern part of the state, they stand out just like this bird for being very sort of coarsely marked. Prominently, contrastingly marked. It's almost like sort of like a song sparrow versus Lincoln sparrow. Lincoln sparrow is so finely marked. It's sort of like a Cassin's finch in that regard. And the other thing is,
if we're putting the three finches on like a continuum line from most streaky to most blurry, then you've got Cassins on one end and house on the other, and then in the middle you've got your purple finches.
Yep. Yeah, and just to be clear, there are two purple finches. So the
Yeah,
far western purple finch has more of that blur thing going on there as
that's
well.
interesting.
So that's a challenge as well. And they do get around. So looking for a California or far western purple finch is a activity for for those of us in the Rocky Mountain region. So when we see purple finches, we sort of assume they're eastern purple finches, but that may not be a good assumption. So anyhow, purple finch all the way, but I just note that making this not a sparrow or a rose-breasted grosbeak is a not totally trivial undertaking either.
Yeah, most sparrows, when I see sparrows, as you mentioned, a finch is likely going to be feeding higher up. They're going to be using a feeder that is a thistle feeder or a sunflower seed hopper, whereas a sparrow is, with some exceptions, are going to primarily be low on the ground on a ground feeder. They have much longer tails too. Purple finches are kind of big-bodied, short-tailed things compared to something like even a Savannah sparrow, which is sort of a longer, shorter-tailed sparrow. They still are even shorter than that. I've never seen a Savannah sparrow at a feeder in the neighborhood, though.
Oh,
so.
me neither.
Yeah. Speaking of sparrows, let's move on to our next bird. This one is another Carolina bird. I swear I did not do that on purpose. I just thought that this was a particularly interesting image, just because I think that this species can be confused for a couple other sparrows which might be around this time of year. Ted, when you look at this bird, what are some of the things that stand out to you?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I think this is actually a very difficult ID.
I think so too.
Fact,
That's why I chose.
I'm not even positive what it is, but let's consider two possibilities. So the first, I think, that's going to strike a whole bunch of people is white-throated sparrow. It's got a white throat. It's got a yellow super laurel there. It's got a dark crown with a little bit of a white median stripe there. All of those marks are very good for white-throated sparrow. And the question arises, what else could this possibly be? So a bird in a different genus, actually, the swamp sparrow, can look strikingly white-throated. I've seen a lot of white-throated swamp sparrows. It's a fairly rufescent or rusty bird like this one. And it's hard for me not to call this another thing I like about swamp sparrow on this bird is the what we call the postocular stripe, that the black going behind the eye right there. I would kill for another angle on this. It sounds like you're not going to give
that's the case
not going to
with
give
a lot
me
of these birds.
give me that one here, or a chip note, or or a flight call, or anything else like that.
The subtitles of these, the subheadings of these presentations are the perils of single photo identification.
Yes, exactly. So it's funny. There's a part of me that, I don't know, is sort of defaulting to swamp sparrow, but I don't like that solid black crown with the hint of the white median stripe. Certainly a lot of white throat. It's got the yellow super laurel. So I'm actually going to walk away from this one.
So
it's one of those two. I'd love to hear a chip note, but I think this could be white-throated, but something about it makes me really want to take a second look, get a second listen, see another photo, get a second opinion. Yeah. So I'll lean weakly white-throated with swamp as a strong fallback.
Yeah, my impression of this was swamp for a lot of the reasons that you gave. I think that the white throat underneath there is a little messy for white-throated sparrow.
Yeah, and so it's a little weak too. It's not as extensive enough. So you're talking me out of white-throated already. Okay.
Well, that's sort of my impression, and I chose this photo and this species in particular because I've seen many photos of swamp sparrows where you see one image of the bird and you would think it's a white-throated sparrow, and vice versa, actually, because they are shockingly similar. They can be found in similar sorts of places, though swamp sparrows obviously sort of tend towards wetter areas than white-throated sparrows. But that's I think that's a very underrated identification challenge, which says something considering they are from two different genera and frequently you don't have that mistake. But a photo like this, you can see where those are similar. So I lean swamp in this bird, and I think that was the consensus on the What's This Bird comment thread as well, if that tips you any one way or the other. But I chose this bird because it looks so much like a white-throated sparrow, and I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about the possible confusion of those two birds.
for anybody who has absolutely nothing better to do with their Friday, if you want to do this, please after the show. But if you go into my eBird account and look at my most recent photos of white-crowned and white-throated sparrow in the same pose at the same, pretty much the same perch, it's striking how white-throated the white-crowned sparrow looks and how unwhite-throated the white-throated sparrow looks. So those would be images of mine from the day before yesterday, which is what, the 21st of October, I guess. But yeah, there's a tremendous amount of variation in white-throated sparrows. I've seen winter white-throated sparrows that are absolutely as streaky below as a song sparrow, including the stick pin in the middle of the breast. And then of course sometimes you get those just brilliantly almost sort of semaphoric black and white birds with the glorious white throat and the bright yellow superlaurel. I mean, how could it be anything but a white-throated sparrow? So they really run the gamut from almost sort of drab brown mush to one of our most stunningly colored sparrows.
Yeah, and they both tend to have especially the young birds, the kind of streaking on the diffuse kind of streaking across the breast, and that can be I don't know which one. I mean, I've seen it in both of them for the most part, so it can be tough. But yeah, my inclination is swamp for this bird, though. If someone showed me a photo that absolutely convinced that showed the rest of it, or a chip note or whatever that convinced me that this was a white-throated, I wouldn't necessarily be.
And I want to be really crystal clear that I'm not advocating for white-throated. I'm just not prepared to rule it out either. So this is not a definitive identification.
Fair enough. Here's one that perhaps you see a bit where you are. This is one of those kind of touchy photos that can kind of go either way a little bit, but I think that this photo shows a lot of obviously large black bird from Sugarloaf, California. That's the interior of California. So what are you looking at on this thing? A couple things stand out to me. Obviously, we're the two species we're trying to convince to here are: is it a crow or is it a raven? So crow or no? Hashtag crow or no.
So I would say no, it's not a crow. To me, it looks very honkingly big billed, and by the way, very long tail, long winged. I can't quite see. Can't see where the wings end, but it looks like they go at least, if that's the tail, at least to the tail, if not beyond the tail. And on an American crow, the wings would fall far short of the tip of the tail. So this is a bird, unlike that sparrow, that to me just sort of instantly leaps out as a raven, perhaps because I see ravens every day. Sugarloaf is in San Bernardino County, and we actually may not be in the range for crow at most times of the year. I'm not really sure where in San Bernardino County this is, but there are probably stretches of that county that don't even have crows. It's a huge county, by the way. It's like half the size of South Carolina. So it's immense. So a question, by the way, that kind of comes up is what species of raven is. Oh, by the way, so Nate, do you agree this is a raven? It's not a crow?
Yes, I agree that it is a raven for the reasons you said. The long wings, the nasal bristles that kind of go way out, and the big bill. Yep.
Yeah, so let's talk about those nasal bristles, though, because we're getting into the weeds here. But there's the question of what species of raven is it? And we tend to think of this as Chihuahuan versus common raven, as Nick Miner has sort of done a really nice job of calling our attention to in several features in his Frontiers column in Birding. There are actually 3 species of ravens in the United States. There's a California raven that sort of flies under the radar. It's not named. So basically it's in the process of re-merging with the common raven.
Sort of like a northwestern crow thing going on there.
Except it's a lot more distinct. So
really?
this California raven is actually probably allied with Chihuahuan raven, not with common raven, but the birds are in this process of re-merging now. And the length of those, the nose hairs, the bristles on top of the beak are what we look at. And I think, it's a funny angle here, but they look longish like Chihuahuan to me and not shortish like common. Now, by the way, I still think it's a common raven, but the question of whether it's got this California raven genome in it is an open matter. This remnant, late Pleistocene era, California raven is best represented in the coastal populations. But it all kind of becomes mush down in Southern California. So technically speaking, this is a common raven because it's the only raven you get in California. Right. I know they're going to be Californians. You're going to chime in and correct me here, but there are either very few or no records at all of Chihuahuan raven from California. That's just a much more easterly bird than that. So just by distribution, this has to be a common raven. But when we start to bring in evolutionary history, all sorts of interesting questions come into
Yeah,
play here.
love it. Let's go in the weeds.
Go into the
Raven
weeds. All
Yeah.
right.
No, I had no idea about that California raven. Um, that's really interesting. California is evolutionary marvel. A lot of unique
Indeed.
things out there. So here's another species that a lot of people perhaps might be seeing on their lakes as we head into winter across much of the continent. This photo was taken in October in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. And what kind of ducks do we have here, Ted?
Right. So why aren't these ducks? Why aren't
Yeah,
these say ruddy ducks, which male
a
ruddy
lot of
ducks
those
at
at
this time of the
Yellowstone, if
year
I remember right.
have white cheeks and a black, generally black bodies. But there are a couple of problems with this being a ruddy duck or any other duck. The bill is not a duck's bill at
Mm-hmm.
all. Most ducks have those sort of flattened bills, very broad at the base and continuing to be fairly broad out toward the tip. There's some aberrations there, like the mergansers, but a merganser bill is going to be fine, and you probably even be able to see the so-called serrations or teeth on the bill. So um, this is the bill of a grebe for sure. Also, those bright red eyes are
Mm-hmm.
perfect for a grebe. Now, there are some red-eyed ducks. The cinnamon teal is beautifully red-eyed, but there are a bunch of reasons this isn't a cinnamon teal. So the combination of that kind of bulbous, longish, rounded yellow bill and the red eyes, and then also the long necks overall. Tell us that this is a grebe.
Indeed.
The black and white pattern puts us in the genus. I think it's Podiceps. So that would be
Mm-hmm.
the eared, horned, and
End
red-necked
end feet.
grebes. Say it again.
End
Oh,
feet.
feet.
Yeah. Podiceps.
I'm sorry.
Means feet.
I thought you were saying for me to look at the feet. And I was saying, what
Oh
are
no,
you
well, you
seeing
can't.
here?
Well, you sort of see, maybe a little, but
Yeah,
podiceps means end feet. So a seps like biceps,
gotcha.
triceps. So like
Cool.
biceps means two ends. It's the where it connects to the bone, and seps means the end. And so poda, like you know, podiatrist,
Mm-hmm.
foot doctor, feet end feet. So its feet are at the end of the body.
Yep. In fact, the whole grebe order is or
Yeah,
Podicipediformes, I think. So, yeah,
podicipediformes.
they're
Yep.
named for their feet. So, anyhow, we are in that genus of redneck, horned, and eared. It's not rednecked for a bunch of reasons. The bill isn't nearly dagger
Mm-hmm.
enough, and it's just not a
Not long enough.
elegant, long-necked bird. So then we come to eared and horned, which are tricky birds for sure. Again, first thought, best thought. Maybe it's not a good thought, but these birds look fairly large and substantial and rounded to me, the way that a horned grebe would
Mm-hmm.
look. Eared grebe tends to ride very high on the water, like it's
Mm.
sort of like it's overinflated and floating. Another mark on these birds would be, I think I'm seeing it on both of them, the white tip at the end of the
Yep.
bill,
You can
and
certainly
that's
see
a
it on both
mark.
birds. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a mark that is perhaps the best and most reliable mark overall for horned grebe. It shows
Hmm.
that in all times of the year,
That's
all
interesting.
plumages, both sexes, as soon as the birds come out of their juvenile plumage and have a fully formed bill. So if you see the white tip of the bill, I, I hate to do the single field mark thing, but I think that tells you that you've got a horned grebe. So all of those marks are good for horn. I also want to point out that molt timing is a big deal. For these grebes in spring and fall, especially spring. But if this is a recent photo, by mid-October, they're basically both in their winter
Yep.
plumage. So horned grebe, and I can't resist throwing out one tidbit here. This bird, and of all things, a winter plumage long-billed merlet, are incredibly similar in appearance. And so long-billed merlet is a possible bird for us in Colorado in October and November. Most records are sort of from around Halloween to Thanksgiving. We have multiple long-billed merlets, which is the case for many states in the interior West. I always wonder if a long-billed merlet has gone under the radar because it was written off as a horned grebe. So yeah, if you compare illustrations of long-billed merlet and horned grebe in early winter, I would challenge you to find any plumage differences between them. No, their body shapes are completely different.
Yeah.
But horned grebe and long-billed murrelet, as odd as that may seem, I think are a under-recognized ID conundrum for the Western U.S., sort of from around, as I said, Halloween till around Thanksgiving.
Well, anywhere in the U.S. I mean, we have 2 long-billed murrelet records from North Carolina. So,
okay.
Yeah, I could see that a horned grebe would look more like a long-billed murrelet than a long-billed murrelet could look like a horned grebe. If a horned grebe were to like kind of get down. I chose these birds too because I think eared grebe and horned grebe can be, while in their winter plumage, this sort of basic plumage, they are not terribly difficult. You can see the very clean line on the face that separates the black cap and the white cheek from on a horned grebe, whereas that's a bit more muddled in an eared grebe, at least in the winter. But like in September, it gets a little tough because, as they're molting, they have a lot of dark patches all over themselves, and they can be actually kind of a difficult bird to identify, especially at a distance, which is frequently how you'll see them on a reservoir or a lake. I mean, they can be way, 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 way out there, so you don't get as nice a look of them as you see these birds. Another thing I'm struck by grebes is that you can't see the wings when they're sitting on the water very much. I love how they like tuck their wings underneath their body feathers and just look like a round, hairy mass.
Yeah, I mentioned the tip of the bill, and I actually should briefly comment on the structure. The structure of those birds, those 2 species bills are really quite different. If these were eared grebes, the lower mandible lower mandible would be pointed upward and would come to a very fine tip. So the eared grebe has this sort of haughty, bill in the air look about it, very, very, very pointy tipped or fine tipped. Yeah, exactly. And the horned grebe, which again is what these birds are, has the more rounded, bulbous look to it.
It's a grebe of the people. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the proletariat grebe, and the other is the
bourgeois grebe. We have a question from on Periscope from at JulieB99 asks, are they flightless? That is an interesting question when it comes to grebes. No, but is the answer. They do go through a period of molt migration where they migrate. Don't grebes migrate like all? Don't they molt like all their flight feathers at once? And they go through a period where they actually are flightless for a period of time.
Yeah, so this is incredibly complicated. If these were, and that's a trivia question I'd love to toss out there. What is America's flightless bird? And the eared grebe may be flightless for more than half the year. And we're talking about adult birds. It goes through these periods of so-called hyperphagy when it's eating like crazy and molting and is so heavy and unfeathered that it cannot fly. And this is not just like a couple of weeks. It's a couple of months during several times through the course of the year. The person who's just done some amazing research on this is Joe Jehl, Jehl, and it's really worth Googling his papers. Some of the physiological work they did on flightless grebes at Mono Lake in Eastern California is stunning work. So the conventional wisdom is that eared grebe is our flightless grebe, but there's sort of whisperings out there that other grebes. So the 2 other grebes in this genus, especially this one here, the horned grebe, and then also the big swan neck grebes, the Ecmophorus grebes, horned and Clark's and Western grebes are flightless as well. I can tell you that I see grebes at my local patch that are there for months at a time and don't make any rumblings of flying whatsoever. Yeah. And I've actually wondered if my Western grebes are flightless for a little while. So the answer to the question is, I don't know. These could actually be flightless. The bird's close cousin, the eared grebe, is flightless in some instances for more than half the year.
That's wild. I think back, it's one of the questions that that birders ask when they're together. It's like, when have you seen a grebe fly? And it doesn't happen all that often. Like, and every time I do, like if I see a pied-billed grebe flying across a reservoir or something, like I have to pause for a moment and like make that mental connection. Like it's like a brain bird. Like I can't make that. It doesn't connect. And then when you notice, oh, that's a pied-billed grebe, but it's flying. It's just something I don't see. They drag their big feet behind them, and they look so strange.
I saw years ago, but it still stuck with me, a Western grebe in flight just over a town, and I knew what it was, but I'd never seen anything like that before, a Western grebe in sustained flight. Hey, one other thing on grebes. So Nate, you started out by saying, why aren't these ruddy ducks or ducks? And that's fair. I just want to point out, and some of us are up on this and some of us aren't, but we now know what grebes are. And it turns out that they're in a group that consists of flamingos and pigeons. So grebes, flamingos, and pigeons of all things
it's a bizarre
it's a bizarre assemblage, but they have some similarities. Some
Yeah.
of the details of like maternal care, maternal physiology, vocalizations, proclivity for hypersaline environments, some skeletal structures, especially with regard to the bill, actually do unify these groups. And of course, DNA is always the smoking gun here. But it turns out that grebes, which for the longest time we thought were loon-like, are actually more related to ruddy ground doves than they are to grebes, or for that matter, ruddy ducks.
Bizarre. Yeah. Evolution, it's a heck of a thing. So we have one more bird that we're going to go to before we call it a wraps. But if anyone has any questions about birds or birding or anything that you wanted to ask me or Ted while we have him, please feel free to drop those in the comments. We will pick them up, and I'm trying to keep an eye out for all the places that people can comment. Please let us know, and we'll try to answer those questions about what you're seeing, or why birds are at your feeder, and why are they all pine siskins. So I got one more bird. It's another sparrow. This is one from central Mexico, which is outside the purview of the ABA area, at least for now. And but this is a bird I think that birders in North America, the U.S. and Canada, I should say, are pretty familiar with. But it's a sparrow. Can we nail it down to that? It's small, brown, and streaky. And what else are we seeing here? I'm seeing bright gray rump. I'm seeing kind of fine streaks on the back. I'm seeing a very prominent eyebrow, supercilium. What else are we looking at on this bird, Ted?
So I'm going to go to back us up here on something. I agree with you, by the way, that this is a sparrow. And I think this is a classic example here of the bird we really want it to be versus the bird it probably is. So this is it's a fairly slight, plump-bellied bird. I know you can't see the belly, but it just looks round up front with I think a long tail. It's foreshortened. So we're in the genus Spizella, and then talk about leading the witness. It says Central Mexico. And even if this were a sparrow, you said like Central Mexico, my mind immediately goes to one of the most sort of enigmatic and iconic of Mexican species, which is the Worthen's sparrow. It's in the genus Spizella. It occurs nowhere on Earth, but in north central Mexico. And actually, it looks like this bird. Hang on, I need to get the image up here. So Worthen's sparrow is told by the fact that it's a pink-billed Spizella with a bright white eye ring. So this looks like it ought to be a a Worthen sparrow, which again is this iconic, enigmatic, must-see bird if you're in north central Mexico.
It's one of the bizarre birds on the ABA checklist, in that there is one record from New Mexico in like 1892, and that is it. None others, no others.
And it's and the location is mentioned. I think it's Silver City. So so often in these problematic records, the location is Colorado, which could be like 35 nameplate Colorados in both Mexico and the United States. In the case of Silver City, New Mexico, it does sound plausible, but there are some questions about how that bird or that specimen ever made its way to Silver City. So yeah, it's a very enigmatic bird. However, I don't think it's a Worthen's sparrow. It's got the wrong face, and you already talked about that prominent supercilium, that buff patch above the eye. It's also got a black so-called transocular line. That's the line that goes behind the eye and in front of the eye. I think I can see it there. The white eye ring is broken. It looks like there's a black eye line going to the pink bill. And then you already mentioned the very prominent gray. I got to be careful with my terminology here.
I guess it's not the rump.
I
said rump.
I know. Yeah,
above the rump.
Yes. Well, no, actually, that would be the rump. Yeah, I think it's both the rump and the upper tail coverage are gray. And then they're not they're more strikingly gray than the collar, the nape area. So I think that rules out clay-colored sparrow on this. So I think this is just the ordinary workaday, perfectly plebeian chipping sparrow. But I sure can see why somebody's mind might go to a Worthen sparrow on this as well.
Yeah, I grabbed it off What's This Bird, and I didn't read I didn't look closely at the comments below it to see whether or not people were thinking, Worthens. But it's great to be aware of that stuff. But as you say, I do think it looks It does look like a chipping sparrow, the kind of chipping sparrows that we have across in the winter across much of the southern tier of the United States. But they are migratory in much of the rest of the northern U.S., Canada. Are they year-round birds for you, Ted? They're year-round for me.
No, they're strictly summer. In fact, they have a complex distribution here. They arrive in May to breed, and their breeding season's extremely short. And then they have a recently discovered almost sort of whole population migration that starts around July 4th. The birds move in the middle of the night in early July to molting grounds in far eastern Colorado, and also Kansas and Wyoming. Sorry, Kansas and Oklahoma, and then they continue south, as you said, to the southern tier of the United States in October. So they are gone. They're actually gone from the breeding grounds by like July, which is amazing. It's barely the beginning of summer, and then they're gone from the state by about this time of the year.
Yeah, we have them in the winter here, and I tell you, like the winter chipping sparrow is one of the more common ID, kind of brain birds that people have in the area. They look rather different than they do in the summer. They're a bit streakier. Not quite as bright gray, although the rump and the upper tail coverts, as you note, do sort of retain that gray. But they look like different birds, and they can confuse people, especially when you're looking for those clay-colored sparrows, which are
and there's another lookalike, and I need to be careful here. I'm going to have to
brewers
protect. No, protect the innocent or the guilty. But so we have a problem in winter with chipping sparrows being misreported. American tree sparrows being misreported as chipping sparrows, and we refer to them as we're at the fill in the blanks. I'm not going to say the name here. Chipping sparrow. There's a particular part of the state and a particular Christmas count that grossly over reports chipping sparrows. But yeah, if you have a chipping sparrow like bird in the dead of winter in Colorado, it's almost guaranteed to be an American tree sparrow, a bird that we used to think was in the same genus as the chipping sparrow, but that we now know bizarrely is related to the fox sparrow. You can hear that, for example, in the bird's song and a few other details. But yeah, that's a tricky problem for us in the winter months.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's the other way around where we are. People tend to report winter chipping sparrows as tree sparrows, which do show up from time to time, but they're quite uncommon in the southeast. If anyone has any questions about birds or bird ID or anything else that we've done, please leave us in the comments. We've been surprisingly lack. I know that people have been watching. I can tell that people have been watching, but we have a surprise. I guess we can say that Ted has answered all of our questions about birds and birding. We have no additional questions about birds or birding for people to answer. But we'll let it go a couple minutes here, and then I'll give people a chance to drop some questions in there. Otherwise, we're coming up on an hour, so we will probably say I don't want to take any more of your time. Ted, I know I'm very gracious that you
we're holding off the insurance adjuster. The longer this goes on, the better. We can talk about the Worthen sparrow for an hour and a half if you want to, and anything to delay.
I know
the
nothing
inevitable.
about the Worthen sparrow other than the bizarre fact that it was in New Mexico in like 1892. That's the only thing I know about the Worthen sparrow.
Yeah, and by the way, that's the only thing anybody knows about the occurrence of Worthen sparrow in the ABA area. There's just nothing else about that record. So the specimen doesn't exist. It's never been It's never been viewed. No, it's lost. It's not known where it was. It's just sort of so there is some question as to whether it ever was a Worthen sparrow, or if it was a Worthen sparrow, whether it ever was in the United States. Yeah. So so it's founded a part of the United States that, of course, wasn't the United States until well into the 19th century. Yeah. Now, I know by 1892 it would have been, but there was still some lingering question about even what country you might have been in at that time. So it's a strange record, to say the least.
Yeah. All right, so I don't have any questions. We do have Marcia Balestri says that she misses Greg, but it's a rare treat to have Ted on. I agree. It's been fun.
Well, we can do a threesome one of these days. I'm not sure how that would work, but
yeah, we can figure it out. Okay. We have the abilities. So anyway, I'm gonna. If we don't have any questions right now, I'm gonna go ahead and say good night. If you enjoyed get to the afternoon, I suppose. If you enjoy these sorts of questions, please live shows, bird ID things, please consider joining the ABA at aba.org/join. We certainly enjoy that. You help support us, Ted and I, and Greg as well, as we try and bring the birding knowledge to the general public to the best of our abilities. You can get more information about that at aba.org/join. join. Otherwise, I will say thank you to you, Ted, and thank you to everybody who was watching along. And we'll be back in a couple weeks, and we'll do it again.
Great.
Bye, folks.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Appreciate
Bye,
it.
Ted.
Okay. Bye-bye.